Right, we are live. Well, welcome for those that are just joining. Putting a little message over on the right-hand side. Just thinking name, position, where are you watching, listening from? I see Houston is in there, who is on the East Coast today. Good to see you, my friend. Wish we were doing this one together. It's always fun to do these together. But know that all of these messages, anytime during the webinar, are private. We're the only ones that see those, but it's always great to hear from you, who you are, what role you're playing in your school district, or even how you support schools. Sometimes we get school board members, sometimes we get even parents or business leaders in here. So just what your role is and where you are watching and or listening from. We're going to be talking about trainings today, the different ways that we support schools at Character Strong through training. So we're going to be digging in just probably about 30 seconds here, but I see, hi, Amy from Dickinson ISD. Thanks for joining us today. We'll give about 30 more seconds for people to join and we'll get going. If you can hear me, maybe just put a little comment. If you're in here right now, the audio's okay, the video's okay, you can see the screen. If you'd be willing to put that into the comments, that would be wonderful, just to make sure that things are running smoothly. All right, thanks, Houston. I got you. Sounds great. Nice lighting. Thanks, Hugh. I really work hard on that. It's natural light. All right, Danielle, Director of Student Activities in Miami. Welcome. Thank you for making time. I'm going to just start right off here. And as you're coming in, feel free at any point during this brief webinar talking about trainings, how we're supporting schools when it comes to professional development. Feel free to ask any questions over in that message area. And we will answer them throughout and especially at the end, and we'll take time to do that. So just to start, we always like to have a question of the day. And the question today is this, kind of almost two parts. What kind of training does your school and or district use to best support teaching and focusing on the whole child? If you had to put in there what you are doing around this or have done, what type of trainings have you used in the past to think about culture and climate? And what our team does is we'll pull one or two responses, and by the end have a fun little giveaway. And I'll come back to this in just a moment, but we're going to be giving away one of our Make Kindness Normal t-shirts, or a couple of those. They're definitely a favorite. They're nice and soft. People, it's a great conversation starter. So just interested in, have you done anything this area? Maybe you haven't done a training yet when it comes to focusing on teaching the whole child, training around climate and culture. So we'll leave that there, see what some of those responses are as they're coming in. Know that all of these are recorded. They'll be able to be watched again. If there's someone on your team that isn't here that you want to make sure sees it, or if you ever register for one of our future webinars and you know you can't make the date, still registering for it, we'll have that recording sent to you later on, and you can watch it at a later date. So that's the question of the day. Would love to see a couple responses with where you're at. We are going to be giving away a couple t-shirts today, but let's dig right in. The title of today's webinar is Thinking About Attending an Educator Training. And what we know at Character Strong is this. We knew that a key piece of the work we were doing around that holistic approach to improving school climate and culture, focusing on the whole child, We knew that the adult behavior practices, the relational work, that training of the staff, we knew it was going to be important, like a key piece. I think what we've realized more than anything is I think it is the piece more than any other thing. Our curricula that we're using to support students to keep it ongoing. But the number one piece of work I believe that we're doing right now is the work we're doing with the adults in the building, because we know that the highest impact size on multiple studies, but including the big one that many of us have heard about, John Hattie's meta-analysis, right? The highest impact size is what is happening from the adult to student level, that relational level, what's happening day in and day out in that classroom is a big, big deal. And so this is an important part of what we're doing at Character Strong, and we believe in approaching that in more than one way. So I'm going to talk about the different ways that we're supporting training educators in this work, and then hope that there are some questions as we go. So the two main ways, besides the outside ongoing resources, which I'll probably mention a couple of times. So ongoing things that we're providing schools for free are, we've got a weekly blog that is going out that many schools will use as a part of their continued educator trainings. They'll send it out in their weekly newsletter or email it out to their staff. So we have a weekly blog. We have webinars monthly that are coming out like this that they can use in different ways, even if it's training their own teams to be able to go out and then be a part of what they're doing with staff at staff meetings and different pieces. We also have at least 2 times a week a free podcast that's coming out, the Character Strong podcast on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and many people are accessing that because we try to keep it right around that 10-minute mark, which is kind of like the Character Strong commute, something that you can actually get through that really starts planting seeds. In fact, there's a district in Washington State who has gotten approved clock hours, so those continued professional learning hours, if they are listening to those podcasts, which is really cool to hear. So when it comes to the more official educator trainings, though, we have a 2-pronged approach. So we have in-building professional development, we'll call that PD today, and then we have educator trainings, or ET, that we'll reference today. The PD, professional development, is in-building. So it's one of our presenters, trained presenters, coming into your building and or into your district, because sometimes the district will say, we're bringing these 3 schools together and we're doing a big district kickoff day because maybe they've gone district wide with Character Strong, and it's our trained presenter coming in to really dig into the what, the why, and how of Character Strong, including the curricula, but as well as what we are doing from a school-wide approach, what we're doing through the adult behavior practices, because we know it takes that holistic approach. So many people use it as a kickoff for the year or a key reminder, because we know that we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. And it really does get into that in a level, connecting them to their why. I think one of the things we can do is push harder in many cases on why this work is so important than maybe a district or a building leadership might be able to, because of how close they are with their staff. And because if we don't hit that why, then it's definitely going to be one more thing on our plate. So it's that really tier 1 foundational training focus that gets a school ready to deliver our curricula, and or there are schools that even just use it as a tier 1 foundational shot in the arm. Like, we need a boost to come back to relationships, even to build readiness to maybe eventually use a tier 1 social emotional learning curricula. The educator trainings, or ET, that's different. That would be more for your, like a team, or maybe a key set of champions. Sometimes schools might send just like an individual to this. Sometimes they send a couple people. The ideal setting, you're sending like a tier 1 team, which might be an administrator, counselor, a group of teacher leaders that are coming, and this is more of a train the trainer. This is something where we're going to really be talking about implementation. In fact, we've been working with Dr. Clayton Cook, the University of Minnesota, on creating a centralized set of implementation resources in our web-based platform. And one of those things is what we call the CSI, or the Character Strong Implementation Fidelity Rubric. And in that, we're going to dig into that in this training, because these are the people that are going to come back to your school and really help to make sure that the work is moving forward. Because we know for effective implementation, teaming is needed. We have to have teaming that is happening. And so we'll dig into that more, like implementation. We'll talk about that fidelity rubric. We also, at the Educator Trainings talk about what we call our SERVE model, which is a way that we can infuse social emotional learning, a focus on relationships and character development into the daily fabric of our schools. So instead of saying here are 16 proactive classroom management strategies, which are all good, but it's too much. What if we really narrowed our behaviors as a staff and as a system and did these key things weekly and or daily and or monthly? And so we would talk about the SERVE staples, which are really low burden, high impact, high leverage things that we could be doing and are building to get traction with this work. So that's a general setup of the difference between those two. Neither are required, but we offer both to really support that implementation work. In fact, our PD, which I'll talk about in a moment, has more than 1 year, more than one touch point. It's not just one training. So at that in-building professional development, we frame the training around what we call the circles of culture. So one, we break down those two things, climate and culture, because schools will mention those words a lot, but we don't always have a common language, aren't always talking about the same thing. So we really break down the difference between climate and culture, that culture is behavior. It's how people actually behave repeatedly and habitually. No matter what is up on your wall, how people actually behave, that is your culture. Climate is different. Climate is a feeling. Which one do we have more control over? Culture. We have more control over going after, teaching to, acknowledging, giving incentives towards those behaviors that we want to see, both the staff and the students. And when we really do hard work of culture, we're more likely on the ongoing to get the ideal school climate that we want. But we cannot always determine the feeling of a place. We could have the best lesson we've ever created as a teacher, and one student coming in who's having a bad day can flip that upside down, right? And in those moments when your climate takes a hit, even more of a reason to have a strong culture when it comes to your adult behavior practices, strong culture when it comes to how you are as a school, like what are the expected behaviors. So we really dig into that. And then we frame the day around clarity, competence, and consistency. The clarity section, we dig into the why, not only the why of the work, but reconnecting educators with their own why. The competence piece, we really dig into what are the competencies that we're teaching students, and then how do we teach it? So we'll go through, role model a lesson. What does it actually look like to put it into action? And then in the consistency piece, we bring it full circle, not only what is needed from a school-wide piece to get that ongoing climate and culture that we want, but even individually, what are the consistent behaviors we need to see from staff and or students? So we frame the day around those circles of culture, with clarity being the question of what do people actually believe in and or care about, competence, what do people actually know how to do, both staff and students, when it comes to this work, and consistency, what are people actually doing daily and or weekly. So in year one, we really set the stage on that. Just like I mentioned, we talk about those two pieces and really dig in. Whereas in year two, or the second time we might come in, we come back to those circles of culture, but then we really start to dive in more specifically into looking at how we intentionally bring the 5 main competencies of CASEL, the social emotional learning competencies that many of you that are deep in this work know exactly what I'm talking about. But we bring those 5 social emotional learning competencies together with character development, how we do that. And we do more intentional exercises in that PD. We talk about that implementation piece more. We reflect on how things are going from year one and then take it further. And in fact, we even have a year 3 that gets even more customized to then how this implementation is working, because we know that implementation science tells us this. There is no research anywhere that backs up the idea that something takes in 1 year. And yet we are famous in education for saying, like, this too shall pass. Well, there's a reason why we say that. There's zero research to back up that idea that this is gonna work in 1 year. No, implementation science would say we need to look at this through the lens of 3, 4, 5 years. Like, is it our staff ready for it? And this is where this PD piece might come in to support that. Once we are, then we're looking at year 1 of implementation of, say, the curricula, that we're really working through it, learning from it, what's working, what's not working. Year 2 of implementation, year 3 of implementation. And then after that, you should be looking at it as standardized work. That takes intentionality, that takes planning, and that takes multiple touch points, like we're talking about here with the professional development. Coming back then to the educator trainings, the serve model that I mentioned, which is different. We would teach this in our more team training, where we have trainings regionally around the country. And when we have people who are really championing the work and they've got multiple districts in an area, sometimes we'll even come into that area and host one of our regional trainings there to make it easy for them if they feel they've got that traction in their area, so they don't have to travel as far. But one of the things we dig into is the serve model. And the S is start intentionally, and there's lots of ways that we could start intentionally, obviously in our school, but we would talk about the serve staple is 4 at the door. 4 at the door plus 1 more. It's a daily practice of not just greeting at the door, but how we do it. And the plus 1 more. And when we have that plus 1 more, the research would say that on average, you would get 20% more academic engaged time in an average hour-long class. That's 10 to 12 minutes than if we were to not do it. And there's a big difference between academic engaged time and time dedicated to instruction. So one of the things that this goes to is that whole complaint around we don't have the time. Well, it depends on how you view it. Because if we have more academic engaged time happening than time dedicated to instruction, we just got a lot of time back, because 10 to 12 minutes in a 60-minute period, well, the secondary level, if we have 5-6 periods a day, even if we're only getting half that, and if you take 180 days in the school year and only even half that, if we only got half of those back, we just got a lot of time back. And so we would go through each of these parts. The E is engage relationally, and what is the serve staple when it comes to engage relationally? The respond with empathy. How do we do that? As much as we want to be proactive, how do we better respond to problem behavior that is coming our way? Because a lot of what comes at us is how we respond. So how do we do that more intentionally? And then the values practice daily. How do we work that into our school with students and with staff? And then also the exit intentionally. Each of those would have a staple to it that we would teach, that team could go back and then on the ongoing be infusing it into what you're doing as a staff during the year. We also frame those educator trainings around what we call the 5 Ps. So we're talking not only philosophy, but practice. And that would be the paradigm, the power, the purpose, the practice, and the promise. And one of the pieces where you see that book that's open in that slide, the promise, digs into something that is ours at Character Strong, and it's called the Triangle of Trust. And we really frame the day around it. At the core of our work, it's all about relationships. We know that based on all sorts of research, right? Not just on practice-based evidence. We know because we've been in the work and been in the classroom, but also actual studies that have been done around trauma-informed practices, studies that have been done around students that are dealing with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that we know are in every one of our classrooms. And we know that some students have more than one ACE, in fact, multiple ACEs. We also know that those ACEs transform all socioeconomic backgrounds, not just students coming from poverty, but also students coming from wealth that are dealing with those ACEs. And yet, what's the number one thing that a student needs to be successful day in and day out in your classroom and in your school? And that is a consistent positive relationship, hopefully from a trusted adult. We would add to that, what if it also could be student to student, student to staff, student to community, instead of it just being staff to student. But if at the core of our work, it's all about relationships, that last section of that training is on the promise, which then connects it to trust. Because if it's all about relationships, we better be digging into the idea of trust, because the number one thing that people identify that they want in their relationships is trust. Well, how are we going about that collectively as a staff to be more intentional in that area? So moving to the next slide, we have a little video, and this could be a good time as you're watching this video to put in a question in the chat on the outside. It's a little recap video of some of our trainings. Many of these images come from our regional trainings where they're sending a team of teachers, but a lot of those same themes are throughout in both. I'm going to move over to that. It'll remove me for a couple moments, but you should still be able to put comments, and then we'll come right back and finish today and answer some questions. Character is who you are, built on the thousands of choices that you make daily. We're so excited that this weekend, over 300 educators from across the state are coming together for our Character Strong 2-day training. We're going to be talking about how do we weave social emotional learning and character development into the daily fabric of our schools. At Character Strong, a core belief is we believe that students want to do good. They just don't always know what it looks like. What if we gave them examples of what it looks like to put patience into action, or humility into action, or commitment into action, or even forgiveness into action? How many people have noticed a little bit more anxiety in our students over the last few years? It's through the roof. When anxiety goes up, empathy goes down. If we want all students to learn, if we want all students to be successful, then we need to put a focus on relationships. On a regular basis, when we bring educators together, we hear things like this.
This is the foundation and should be the foundation for everything we do in our schools, starting with our staff and more importantly, getting it out to our entire student body.
The biggest takeaway from the Character Strong training has just been how important relationships are and how we can take a little bit of time to do something that can make a huge difference in the lives of our students and in the culture of our schools.
And we look at this as an opportunity to help our kids build resilience and translate that really into grit to be able to persevere and to be able to be successful in life.
I told John at the end of the training yesterday, the 7-hour training truly did feel like we sat here for 15 minutes, and that's a tribute to the way Character Strong has the training set up with activities, with meaningful conversations that you have with peers, other teachers. It's just a great opportunity, and we know it's going to have a great effect on our building and our kids.
I think the Character Strong program would be helpful for any teacher of any age, K through 12, administrators, everyone.
To be honest, I can't even imagine being an educator not implementing something like Character Strong.
We don't take those comments lightly. There's something happening here that is not only hitting a chord, but working. Picture this: a school where students and staff walk through the hallways every single day and want to be there versus feel like they have to be there. A school that has put a focus back on what's most important, a strong foundation, a strong core, a school that is Character Strong. So feel free to be putting some comments in, any questions you have about our professional development. This is a true statement. It's one that sometimes is hard to share, and that whenever people give compliments, I'm a big believer that we need to receive those with grace and with gratitude. But when people are saying that this is the best PD that they've been a part of in 25 years, anybody who's been in education for even a year knows that there's some really bad PD out there. And we don't take these comments lightly at all. And what it tells us is that there's something that is happening here that is touching a core of why we are doing this work, why we got into this in the first place. And I believe that if anything, if you were to drill that down on what is happening, I think it's a combination of providing a quality training in terms of how it's set up, the flow of it, but it's connecting educators with their why, right? Reconnecting them with their why, but also giving practical ways in which we can actually put that into practice, because so many times it's not that we don't want to do it. It's just how do we do it more intentionally. With the educator trainings, we do have a 1-day and 2-day version of that. Many people sometimes will ask, what's the difference? And one of the things is it allows us to really dig into the work more in regards to the Character Strong implementation fidelity rubric. So the school-wide integration practices that are needed, the adult relational practices, going further into being able to ask questions about and experience parts of our advisory curriculum, as well as our leadership curriculum. The leadership curriculum is a part of what would be the gold standard of bringing Character Strong in, but not all schools obviously have the opportunity to have that as an elective type course. Or if you're at the elementary level, Purposeful People would be a part of that component. And we do have educators K through 12 that come to our more team trainings. At the 2-day, we dig into the servant leadership model that is right now currently only in our 2-day model. And that is something that is not only taught to students in our leadership course, but it is a model that is taught to and provided to big business, organizations, nonprofits, every branch of the military. It's actually originally from James Hunter, who's an author, speaker, consultant, and we use his model with full permission. And it is a great, even for the educators that come, like personal development piece, but also gets anybody who's going to be teaching that course ready. In fact, our friends at Eastmont, shout out to Eastmont School District, every one of their 10th graders next year, either first or second semester, in a school of 1,800 plus, is going to be going through that semester course, that leadership course that really digs into servant leadership and character development. Here's some just images from our training that we do a really intentional job of that flow, like knowing how to work, one, with adult learners, but two, that I really love that comment from the administrator there of like, it was 7 hours, it felt like 30 minutes. And I think that that is really intentionally designed, that there's intentional processing, role modeling of things that we could be doing in our classes that get people up and engaging, but also really digging into the importance of the work. You can find out more information on these educator trainings, the regional ones, at characterstrong.com/educators. You also can be reaching out to us to set up a in-building professional development time. You tell us the date and we'll have a presenter that can come out to you. And in fact, we do have an offer. We always have an offer included in our webinars for taking the time to listen in. And that is 30% off all registrations in our team trainings, which is better than our early bird discounts, that kind of thing. So if you're interested in attending one of our trainings, we are in 3 different locations coming up in Texas. I believe it's July 24th. We're in Harlingen, Texas, and that's a 1-day. And then we have 2 different 2 days happening in Dallas and in Houston, Texas, July 26th and 27th. But going into August, whether it be in Washington, whether it be in California, whether it be on the East Coast, whether it be in Missouri or Wisconsin, we have different locations that we're at throughout the year. We'd love for you to check those out. We'll make sure that the poll is being put up. Before I put the offer up, and I think I can keep talking during it, learning this, I'll put the, right here, I'm going to publish this offer that is up. We do have 2 t-shirt winners, as there might be some questions coming in, and I'll jump over to those questions. But for chiming in with some answers, Danielle in Miami, Florida, we're going to make sure to send you one of our Make Kindness Normal shirts. So our team will follow up with you to get the information on what size you would like and where to send it to. And then Becky in Alice, Texas, thank you both for chiming in there with a response. You're the winners of our Make Kindness Normal shirts. They are really good shirts. But let me move to some potential questions if there are any here, because we are at the end of the time. I'm just looking in here. So I'm coming in a little bit late to it, but it says, how does a first-year teacher implement these relationships without breaking the code of ethics set by TEA, which in their state, and it's like, for example, in Texas, we're not allowed to hug students. Well, thank goodness that there's more than one way to connect with and build relationships that is more than just like giving hugs, right? And we give lots of practical strategies on how to do that. And that is something that is a huge focus in our trainings, is tools that we can be using, not just 4 at the door plus 1 more. We talk about something called a temperature check. How do we, even in the way that we deal with low-level behavior, how do we address it by still having high expectations, but also high supports that still honor and protect the relationship instead of just moving to power? Which I always say, if we don't have the tools, we will resort to power as an educator. And the problem with resorting to power, which is do it because I said so, is that ultimately it ruins relationships. And that student is usually coming back to your classroom. And so how are we more effectively dealing with that while putting a focus on relationships? So how does a teacher implement it? One, I would say being really intentional with taking not overwhelming number of strategies, but getting really narrowed in on a few low burden, high impact strategies that I can begin to practice and then continue to add more to your toolbox as you go. And we can provide many of those tools. Any other questions? I'm just looking here to see if there's any that are coming in. Seeing if they've been flagged. I don't know if I see any other questions here. If you do have questions post this webinar, feel free to be emailing us. You can email contact@characterstrong.com is a really easy one to reach out to us on. If you'd like to book a professional development in building, you can reach out through that as well as on our website, characterstrong.com. If you haven't subscribed to our blog yet, which is that ongoing resource that we put out every week, you should do that. Listen into our podcast. We're having experts from all around the country coming in regularly, talking about what they're doing in their school, what they're doing in their classroom, or people who are supporting schools and educators in the work that they're doing. Just recorded one yesterday on research around how we can support the work that so many schools are trying to deal with around mental health, and how key and how crucial the tier 1 foundational supports are to actually being able to do that deeper work around mental health. So great topics that we're regularly discussing. And then feel free to be tuning into more of these webinars. You're going to get a follow-up from this one with a recording. And we appreciate you all being with us today. Hope you're having a great start to your summer, or if you don't get a summer because this is your busiest time of year, thank you for the work that you're doing to prepare for this next year. So if there's anything we could be doing at Character Strong to support you on the ongoing, we'd be grateful to do so. Have a wonderful day, everyone.